Do you think a PhD is a validation for creating solutions in AI? Join us to find out. My name is Alfred Ongere, and this is the AI Kenya podcast.
The AI Kenya podcast, powered by What's Good Studios.
So in this current day and age, you don't need a PhD in computer science or artificial intelligence to create solutions in AI. Our guest today is a true testament to that. So Babusi Nyoni, welcome to today's episode.
Thank you very much.
So I think we could start by you introducing yourself.
All right.
Who is Babusi Nyoni for those people who don't know you?
Got it. My name is Babusi Nyoni, and I am an AI innovator based in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. But I grew up in Zimbabwe in a town called Bulawayo, and my highest level of education is high school. I went to a public school there. I have been working in artificial intelligence since 2014, and I'm also, for the duration of this week in Kenya, speaking about how we can open up the AI industry for what are termed the forgotten bottom billions.
Okay, so tell us more about what you've just had in terms of the AI tour. What does that involve, and what's the main goal around that?
All right. So how this started was that in April early this year, I met with a former county minister, Honorable Mike Onyango, at Oxford University, and we had a brief chat about where the technology was headed in terms of the African context, and he invited me to come to Kenya to speak to those who feel that they don't have a place to participate in the current technological zeitgeist.
Zeitgeist. What does that mean?
Zeitgeist is the era. It's the defining era. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm also someone who doesn't come from a well-off background. I was telling the kids early on today that I actually used to carry ugali and tea to school. So it's just giving them an understanding of what is possible within artificial intelligence.
So basically, you are going around schools, giving talks around artificial intelligence and sort of how people can get started in it.
Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. So you just mentioned that you are an AI innovator. So tell us about some of the projects or some of the work you've done around AI.
All right. In 2016, I created an artificially intelligent football commentator. And then later on in that year, I created a prototype for the prediction of Africa's next refugee crisis using artificial intelligence. And in 2018, I taught a robot how to make a subgenre of a South African house music category. And later on in that year, I created an app that allows users to parameterize and rate a popular South African dance move known as the Vosho. And in early 2019, I created a prototype for the early diagnosis of Parkinson's disease.
Oh, those are quite some interesting projects.
Thank you.
And could you start with the football commentator? So what exactly was it trying to do or trying to achieve?
All right. So this football commentator was done on behalf of the MNC Sachiable agency in South Africa. It's one of the largest agencies there. And this was done for Heineken Global. And essentially what it was a way for Heineken fans online to interact with a real-time football commentator in a manner that seemed natural and fluid. And how we did this was we taught this model how South Africans on Twitter interacted with social media whenever a football match was on. So the emotional spikes when a yellow card is awarded unfairly, when a penalty is awarded, when a substitution is made for a player that the crowd might not like. These were all moments that the model learned to react to, and for the duration of the Champions League final, it interacted with fans across the spectrum on Twitter. I remember actually the match went into extra time. But that was essentially the goal of it, and the engagement for that was the highest that Heineken had ever seen.
Okay, interesting. And how was all this working? So sort of what was the input and what was the output for the commentator to work?
Got it. So basically what we did was we searched Twitter for tweets that occurred during football matches, specifically in South Africa, and then also specifically in English, because that was a language that was the highest occurring of all the tweets that we saw.
Yeah.
And we fed this into a model and ran a technique called natural language processing, which allowed us to understand the sentiment and also understand the context of these words that we scraped from the internet, to allow this model then to be able to make computations on what to say based on what it is understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now talking about how was the response to this solution? So did people really know they were talking to an sort of a robotic commentator, or they didn't realize that?
So before the campaign started, we had to be transparent for legal reasons. So people knew that they were interacting with something that was autonomous. In the unlikely event, because this was just after Microsoft had that Tay scandal, so in the unlikely event that and this was because of the client's concerns, in the unlikely event that the bot went rogue, we needed to indemnify Heineken Global. But apart from that, people, of course, forgot that, and they would tweet without even mentioning the hashtag that was necessary to trigger the action, because it just felt like something that they were doing with someone who was in active participation.
Okay. And were there any key sort of interesting insights or new things you learned from the interactions of humans with this
that
agent?
I would say it was so Twitter on its own as a platform in South Africa is not the biggest. So the data that we got from there could have been bigger if it was on a much broader platform that people would have been communicating on, but then also the behavior would not have been the same. But an interesting thing that I did learn outside of the way the machines interacted with the people was the need to cater for every edge case, because edge cases, such as in our case when extra time became penalties, that was something that we definitely hadn't thought about as far. So once that happened, we were caught with our pants down.
Okay, interesting. And so about the other solution you talked about, the dance app.
Yes.
What does that involve?
So the dance app is part of a series of AI experiments that I ran last year to try and understand the limits of artificial intelligence when applied in the African context, and then also trying to localize as much as possible bleeding edge technology to try and make it as accessible to as wide an audience. And how this worked was there's a South African dance move known as the Vosho. And what this app does is it parameterizes and gives a weighted score whenever this dance move is performed. And what it does that through is it gives an estimation of various points of your body right in your browser in real time. So when you perform that dance move, we have a formula that looks at the speed at which you've done it and the relative position of your limbs as well, and then it gives you a score out of 100.
And maybe for those of us who don't know how the virtual sort of dance looks like, so is it a full body dance or is it just half part of your body?
So the Vosho is essentially this dance move that is used as an exclamation point in a dance routine. And basically what you do is you'll be upright one moment and then the next you are basically in a very acute squat on the ground, but with your body upright.
Okay.
Right, so you drop to the floor really quickly, and then you come back up really quickly again. It sounds easy, but what it does to your knees is it's pretty intense.
It gives you a bit of damage.
Yeah, it does, and I can attest to that.
And so the app was sort of trying to rate how well someone was performing this
exactly.
dance. Okay.
Yes.
And so what did you learn from this, or in terms of insight, or in terms of challenges, something new that you didn't know would happen?
Yeah. So when we launched the app, it was something that we knew would generate a buzz, but then it also wasn't something whose buzz was generated at us because it was a social interaction app. The only time we ever heard back from users of the app was when they wanted to complain that they were unfairly rated and how they performed poorly compared to someone else who they knew had wasn't able to do as well as they did. But a cool insight that we gained was that there was a genuine willingness to interact with new technology, especially in South Africa, which has the highest levels of economic inequality, but a willingness to interact with new technology as long as there was a context for it. So there were people who were using this app on super cheap devices, including ones that cost about $25, like super low-end smartphones. And they're running these extremely high computations with computer vision that is running in your browser. And all they care about at that point is the score that their voice is going to be, right? So with those learnings in mind, we decided to see if there was something more impactful and a better contribution to society that we could do with the Vosha Dance app.
And the computation was happening on the device, or it was happening on the cloud?
It was happening on the device. So this was possible through the introduction of Google's TensorFlow JavaScript library. And what this allows you to do is to run machine learning computations directly in the browser and in real time, so you can train models in real time in a browser. And this was something that had just been released, and we just hopped onto it and tried to find a use case for it.
Okay. So a typical sort of case in terms of how someone uses the app, so they would go to a browser, or just take me through the steps, maybe.
So we just had a link, and it was actually really interesting how people kept asking, where do I download, right? Because that's the behavior that we know when it comes to things that require more of an effort than just filling in a form. But there was no need to download anything. You just go into the browser. A definite limitation that we had was, for example, Apple's gated app ecosystem when it comes to access to device sensors like cameras and microphones. So there was a major drop-off when people opened the app in-app browsers on Twitter and Facebook, for example. But we did have dialogue in there to try and push them to open in a browser, but that on its own is another step. But so actually the case for and against an app or a web app is one that might actually be explored there, because it might have been more beneficial to just have an app to download and not have to worry about app ecosystems.
So still tying to the question in terms of the steps when someone is trying to use the app. So is there a certain position you need to put it, or how do you go about using it?
You just open the website. There's a tutorial thing if you want to watch a YouTube video to understand how to perform the Vosho. You were told to keep just one subject in the viewport, because any other subject will then mess up the parameter computations. And that was basically it. We just tried to make it as quick as possible. There's a major call to action button on there. You already see the camera in the user interface, so you just want to get that Vosha rated.
And how did you later sort of come to apply this particular solution in a different case?
So understanding what we discovered about the willingness that people had to use this technology, just because of the context, I think in partially we felt a little guilty that we're using this technology for such a frivolous thing. So what we did was we looked for other implementations of pose estimation, or at least some pose parameterization that might have a much deeper impact than just some social interaction app. And we found that Parkinson's disease is a disease whose diagnosis involves largely symptomatic observations.
And
so
what is Parkinson's disease?
Parkinson's
for those who don't know,
is a disease that basically affects your motor skills. You can typically identify someone who has Parkinson's disease by the way that they walk. Sometimes we just say it's old age and someone's walking, but Parkinson's disease is a disease that essentially it affects the curvature of the spine. It affects your gait as you walk. People actually walk with a shuffle.
Yeah.
Their arms are stiff as well as they walk, and you know, I'm just going to digress a little bit. I learned recently that getting chicken pox was not a rite of passage. That
Yeah.
they're actual vaccines.
Yeah.
But growing up,
That
it
can
was
prevent
yeah.
that. Yeah,
I
so-
didn't know that. Yeah, but there's things that we just socialize and accept.
Yeah.
But Parkinson's is an actual disease that starts to affect the body in the way I just described.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how's the app relatable to Parkinson's disease, and how did you arrive at sort of
All right.
applying it to Parkinson's disease?
So, upon understanding that the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease involved symptomatic
estimation.
observation,
Yeah.
we having developed an understanding of how to estimate poses and also parameterize them, and then also assess movement and also speed.
Yeah.
We then took that similar approach and then started to parameterize the distance between a subject's legs as they walked, and then also the rigidity of their torso. So if you're moving laterally, we also assessed whether or not your arms were moving in a way that was relational to the way your feet were walking. And then we also assessed your posture. So if you were walking with a slight stoop, it was something that would be added into the parameters. And then because this symptomatic observation needs to occur over a period of time,
Yeah.
we would store the initial assessment in the local storage, and then you'd have two sequential assessments thereafter.
Yeah.
And then only after the third one would we then be able to make a recommendation as to whether or not you should see a medical practitioner.
And so this would be used in, let's say, a medical center, or this is a solution I can download an app or
Yes.
just go to a web app and just use it at home.
So the goal with this, and I think the use case might change, but the idea was to help people who might not have immediate access to healthcare,
Yeah.
right? But who might need. So this is, of course, the number of people who will feel, wait, let me see if there's an app I can download. It's extremely low. But this was looking at an instance where we might have people who have limited access to healthcare, but it's definitely something that might go on the other side of the counter and be used by healthcare practitioners.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are there any challenges you faced while working on, let's say, all your projects in general, the artificial intelligence projects?
Data will definitely be one. And time is also a major one. So the reason why I'll mention time is because I do these things outside of my actual day job.
Yeah.
So the time I can afford, things like the Parkinson's diagnosis app is something that I did once and then I just parked it. Whereas I can really develop it into something.
Yeah.
Time and data. I think when it comes to the actual technology itself, we're at this point of accepting limitations really quickly and understanding that results generated from machine learning computations might not always be 100% correct. So I always take the outcomes with a grain of salt, and I'm okay with that. But yeah, it's getting the data to be able to actually do so is a major hassle.
And for someone like you whose highest level of education, I'd say, is high school
Yes.
graduation, what would you say, what has been the experience like in terms of innovating in AI? Are there very, very big gaps, or is it something you learn sort of on the go?
Yeah. I will speak mainly about my career and how that's played a major role in my involvement with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
There's a large number of campaign types that I wanted to run at the agency I worked at, but because I was the only person who understood how that technology worked, and then also the only person who had no university education.
Yeah.
And many times as well, the only person of color in rooms where these things were discussed. It was very hard for people to accept that the things I was saying were things that
Credible.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? So when I started doing my own personal experiments, so with the prediction of forced migration in Africa, that was something that I did outside of the need for some kind of organizational hierarchy and validation, because the quickest path to market when it comes to innovation is one that doesn't require buy-in from multiple partners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are there any other sort of work that you're doing in terms of trying to educate other people in AI, let's say back in your country or anywhere you are?
So a thing that's always been just nagging me was the fact that as someone who didn't go to university, who's managed to make a career out of just being able to think in a very agile manner, I haven't been really strong in replicating that kind of approach to work and all that. So last year I took a step in that direction, and I launched something called the Ulwazi Accelerator with a guy called Sean Lovu in Bulawayo. And what this is it's a program that takes people who have some level of education but a high level of interest in artificial intelligence, and for a 2-month period they take this curriculum that allows them to advance their skills, at least gain a basic understanding. And what we do is we also provide them with food every single day that they come, and also with transport, so they really only focus on the educational part of it. And then the outcome of that is, upon completing the program, we put them on paid work with this newly acquired skill, so that this is something that they can take to other places.
And is the program, has it already started? Are there people who have completed?
Yes. So the first cohort was last year, I think in the summer. And of the 28 applicants who started the course, only one made it to the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And why is that? Is there a huge knowledge gap in terms of the prerequisite skills that someone needs to do this, or in your case, what was the main problem?
I think the main problem was the assumption that the willingness to learn would be equal to the willingness to actually do the work necessary to get up to the point at which you 100% know the thing. And people would start out, especially with things that you make accessible, right? People have this idea that it might be easier than it actually is. So I think with those who started out, they might have thought that it might be something that requires a minimum level of dedication to, and then along the way they learned that they were probably not cut out for it. But it was also a major learning point for us.
Okay. And so, sort of rounding up, what would you say is Africa's future in artificial intelligence, in terms of looking at now and then looking at the future?
All right.
Yeah.
I think looking at Africa, I mean, the characteristics that this continent has are very unique, and also very unique in terms of looking at the future of work and the future of economic bases. And the reason why this is because in a couple of years, roundabout by 2030, Africa should have the largest workforce compared to any other continent, right? And when you pair that with where artificial intelligence is, where we're past the point where the most important aspect of the field is research and theory and philosophy, where we now need practical implementations of the technology for it to be valid, and then also to be able to learn to advance as well. So these implementations of the technology require problems, right?
Yes.
And Africa is a continent that is
full of problems.
Exactly, full of problems, and then also, fortunately, because of these problems, is full of innovators who are able to think without even the need to romanticize it. Think well enough to solve those problems and keep it going. And if you multiply that with the amount of people, which is 1.5 billion by 2050 who will be in the workforce in Africa, if you multiply that versatility and that curiosity and that willingness to just solve problems on the fly with the actual workforce that this continent presents to the global economy, then you understand why Africa is perfectly placed to contribute the most important part of artificial intelligence at the point at which it is right now.
Okay. And how can people get in touch with you in case they want to work with you, collaborate on projects?
All right. You can reach out to me on my personal website, that is babusinyoni.com, or you can reach out on the agency website, which is www.triple.black. I have to put the www because people think it's triple.black.com. It's www.triple.black. You can find me on Twitter at my first name, last name, and LinkedIn at my first name.
Okay. Any last words?
Thank you very much, Kenya. I've had a wonderful time here, and looking forward to coming back sooner than soon, actually, because I heard it's mango season in 6 weeks.
We hope to have you back at that time.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah. That was it for today's episode. See you next time.
The AI Kenya podcast, powered by What's Good Studios.